I'm Mike.
I'm a nanny.
And I'm not. Today on Oh So Simply, we are talking about managing expenses as a nanny. So, Rainey, what did you have in mind with this topic, managing expenses for nannies? What does that mean?
So basically, I wanted to just cover the expense side of a nanny business. So how to keep track of things, what things you should be keeping track of, how to manage expenses, and yeah.
Okay. What sorts of things do you need to keep track of as a nanny?
So the first thing that I think is super important that you keep track of in life in general, but especially as a nanny, is receipts. It's really important that anything that you buy for the family, for the kid, for your nanny business, so if you have certain clothes that you wear as a nanny, all of those receipts are important to keep, especially the ones that are going to be reimbursed by the family.
Okay. Do you do anything special when you're keeping your receipts?
So there are a lot of ways to keep receipts. A lot of people that I know will snap pictures on their phone, or they'll use a receipt tracker, like different free apps where you can snap a picture of a receipt and it'll categorize it for you. I personally use the paper copy of a receipt because there are a lot of things that I do paperless, trying to live a minimal life, but receipts are really important for the business side of things. So I do usually keep the paper receipts, and then I write directly on the paper receipt right after the cashier hands it to me, the work, like that it's a work expense, and then what category of work expense it is. So that way I can put it in my folder of receipts, and then at the end of every month I have all of my month's receipts right there that I can look back to and reference as I go over my monthly expenses for my tax tracker.
Do you have to keep track of which families?
Yeah.
And which receipts?
Yeah, so usually I put work receipt and then I'll put what category, so who it was, that's the category for me, because I don't usually further categorize it. It'll either say, like, for example, I'll put work clothes, or like work clothes, or I'll put things like work office supplies, or things like that. Like, I'll make it obvious, or I'll put work and then the last name of whoever the family is that I bought that thing for, because then I can also compare that and make sure that it's going in my invoice for that week, and use that receipt, like snap a picture and send it to them with the invoice. And then later, when I'm figuring out my tax expenses versus income, I have the receipt as proof that this is how much they paid me to reimburse an expense versus they paid me the hourly rate for watching their child, because those do go under two different categories.
I see here you have written down track miles.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you have to record and manage that?
So miles are one thing that you can get reimbursed for by the family, which is why it's important to track them. In the last article that we talked about, we talk about the difference between keeping miles for driving the kids when you're there, and keeping miles for commuting. And so tracking miles in this particular instance, I'm talking about when you're driving with the kids in the car, because usually you can be reimbursed for part of that. If you want, like, I go into that more in the last article, but basically if you want to be reimbursed, you have to keep track of your miles. So it's important that you keep track of your miles, and then keep track of how much you're paid for said miles, because you'll need that information for taxes later.
What sort of expenses might you have as a nanny?
It comes down to what you do as a nanny, but there are a lot of different things that count as expenses as a nanny. Let's start with the things that are most obvious. So you think of things that you buy for the kids, those are obviously expenses you can charge the family for. Clothes that you buy for specifically, like that you're going to wear at work, those are obviously expenses that you will later get back for taxes. Different expenses like that, they're like obvious job expenses, or things like, I had to go out and buy a printer and paper and ink because now I'm printing my invoices to give to the family. Those are very obvious business expenses. Well, not meaning to offend anyone that's watching this, but they're normal business expenses. So like if you didn't know, don't feel bad. But those are normal ones. But ones specifically as a nanny that people don't usually think of are things like if you're subscribed to Netflix or Spotify or Disney Plus or any of those kinds of services, and you're using those, you subscribe specifically for using with the kids, and you use them for the kids, those count as business expenses. So like I remember as soon as Disney Plus came out, I subscribed to it because I had one family and I knew that they would just love it. So we had movie day once a week where we would get to pick a movie and just watch it on Disney Plus. So that was a business expense. And with my Spotify account, everyone that knows me even a little bit knows that it is never quiet around me. Like we always listen to Spotify. We have different Disney playlists, learning playlists, like with the alphabet and numbers. And there's even a color album out there in case you guys didn't know. But like nursery rhymes, everything is on Spotify. So I have my Spotify subscription, and that is also a business expense. And then a couple others that I noted in here were subscriptions to activity services. So recently we partnered with Play Hooray, and we're looking into affiliating with KiwiCo because I love both of their products. They're really easy to have around and to use for activities with the kids. And so those are also business expenses. And then another thing that sometimes people don't remember to do is continual education. I'm always talking about CPR and first aid, and that is actually a business expense because you're getting it for your business. But any other continual education classes that you take of things about general child psychology, but those are all business expenses because you're furthering your education for your company.
As a nanny, do you have to pay for every single one of your expenses?
No, you definitely don't. It sounds kind of bad saying it out loud in this particular verbiage, but you can always offload your expenses to the family. Say you do want to have a Netflix subscription. Instead of you getting it yourself, you can just tell the family, like, hey, I want this. Like, can you get it? And a lot of times they're just like, oh, sure. And they'll get it for you. Things for an activity that you're going to do with the kids, you don't have to eat that expense. In fact, you shouldn't eat that expense. You should pass it on to the family because it'd be the same as giving the mom a shopping list or the dad a shopping list and then having them go and pick up the supplies for you. You're just kind of saving them that trip. You definitely have them pay for it because those aren't your kids. Like, I mean, they feel like your kids, but they're not. So don't pay for that stuff. You can definitely put that in your invoice.
Do you have to have some sort of agreement beforehand about doing that?
I always recommend that in your contract you have a section on, in the payments area, you have a section on reimbursement. And usually I put in a $20 a week budget that you and the parents, by signing the contract, agree that $20 a week, if you spend $20 a week, they'll reimburse it. Like, and for most people, $20 a week is no big deal for small supplies, or like, say you want to bake cookies and they have all of the supplies except for, you're missing chocolate chips. So you run to the store with the kids for chocolate chips. You expense that to the family. It's under $20. I mean, I don't know of any bag of chocolate chips that's more than $20, but so that, and you can always change the price too. So like if you live in, I know the Bay Area in California is really expensive. So $20 might actually feel like it flies with kids, especially depending on how big of the family that you're nannying for is. If they have 4 kids and you live in the Bay Area, $20 is not getting you anything. So, that can change based on your area, or just kind of the family's budget and how they feel about spending money. But usually I put that in the contract with a clause of anything over that will be discussed beforehand. So sometimes I remember there was one family, I had the $20 a week budget, and then we decided to go to Northwest Trek, and that was going to be way more expensive. And so I just said, hey, we want to go to this place. It's going to be more. It's going to be this much. And they were like, okay, yeah, that's fine. So just running the bigger expenses by them, because then you can't expect them to reimburse you for a large expense if you didn't warn them about it. Because they may have, like, you have to think about if they were the ones that were taking their kid to that thing that cost so much, they may have decided that they can't afford it and they would have said no to their children. So you have to think the way that they would think. Like, a lot of times you get an idea of what their budget looks like early on in the nanny-family relationship. So just keep that in mind, because you don't want to push them outside of their comfort zone financially.
Okay, so don't run out and just buy a minivan in their name.
No, definitely not.
Okay. Would you put these expenses in your invoice, or is there another way that you'd handle it?
No, I would put these expenses in your invoice directly in there. I would put it as a separate line. So a lot of times in your invoice, you can have like, this day I worked this many hours and this is how much you owe me. This day I worked this many hours and this is how much you owe me. You can either put at the bottom, this day I spent this much and this is how much you owe me, or at like under every day's hours, you can put those in. So I definitely recommend putting those in the invoice. And when you're making the purchases throughout the week, I usually warn the parents like, hey, just so you know, today we went out and did this fun thing, and like, you know, so that way they know, they can anticipate that they're going to see an extra expense in their invoice.
You said you give yourself a limit for how much you spend. Mm-hmm. You show how much you spent and what you spent it on. Mm-hmm. But what if there's like a problem and the parent says that they don't want to pay for something, or they're mad about you paying for something with their money? How do you go about that?
So there are a couple of questions that I would have about a situation arising like that. The first being, is this something you can return? Because if you go out and you buy the kid a new toy, and then the parents come home and go, oh, we didn't want that, you know, even if it's in your monthly or your weekly spend, your weekly budget for expenses, you know, just return it. Like, it's not a big deal. It's not gonna ruin the child's life, you know, and if it does, then be like, well, sorry, your parents said no. Like, it's, you know, it's their choice. So if it's something as simple as that, just return it. Don't make a big deal about it. Even if it's something that you think they really need or that would make your job easier, you know, you could explain that it might make your job easier. For example, now I know this isn't $20, but if you like went out and bought an Instant Pot because you were the one making dinner every night before you left, you know, you could explain like, hey, this makes my job a ton easier. This actually gives you better meals, gives me more time with the kids. You know, you can explain the benefits of having that. But if they can't just go out and drop near $100 on an Instant Pot, or, you know, $40 or whatever they are going for now, like if they can't afford it, then take it back. Like, they can't afford it, that's fine. Just keep going about your life. The other question I would have is it within your spending budget? Because if you go outside of your spending budget without warning them beforehand and getting them to agree beforehand, then that's on you. And sometimes you do actually have to bite that expense. It'd basically be the same as having a company credit card and then having a bunch of overdraft fees on that. You know, you're gonna be paying for that, especially if they didn't authorize those purchases. And sometimes even with a company card, you give them the bill and they'll hand it back and say these, like, highlighted some things and say these are not company expense, like, we're not covering these expenses. These are personal expenses. And then you're expected to pay for them. So it kind of works the same way. You don't want to take advantage of it. So just be careful about that. And then my other question would be, do you have proof of purchase? So earlier I said keep all your receipts. Part of that is that sometimes they'll just say like, oh, I don't remember you paying for that, or I don't remember like seeing that in my house. Like, where was that? What did you use it for? Especially things that are used in crafts or in baked goods. You know, they might not see it. Like, if you make a batch of cookies and you guys have eaten the cookies before they get home, like, well, first of all, you ate too much sugar, but also, you know, then you don't have proof of those. So then you do have to have proof of receipt. Sometimes it's just a matter of seeing the receipt and then them realizing like, oh, okay, you did actually make this purchase. Like, you're not just trying to inflate your invoice. So.
Yeah, okay.
So a lot of you guys are young. Not all of you, but a lot of you guys are. So I just want to give a quick warning to be careful about how much you're spending. As a nanny, your income, you should be weary of spending, be careful of spending anything more than 10% of what you make in a week, which is why usually $20 a week to spend on your nanny business is best, because you're probably making around $200 to $300 a week, depending on what you're doing, what your job is. So just be careful. That's just a side note that I put in here because a lot of you guys are young and, you know, you get all the money and then you go out and spend all the money, and, you know, you have to remember to not only watch how much you're spending for your nanny business, because then that's money you can't put toward other things that you have to pay for, like bills and stuff. And then also remember that you're going to have to take a cut of what you make and put it and pay taxes if you're doing this as a self-employed person. So you have to just be smart with your finances. And I just wanted to put that note in here since we're talking about money anyways. On that note, everyone handles their own personal finances differently. But one thing as a business owner is I recommend getting a credit card that has some added benefit. So a lot of credit cards you find will either have money back programs or some version of that, like mileage credit cards for airline miles. That's the kind that I have, and I love it because then, I spend my money that I was going to spend anyways, and then at the end of the year, I can go on an extra trip. I recommend getting a credit card that has some added benefit because you're going to be spending that money anyways. You might as well get an added benefit, and using that for your business expenses so that all of your business expenses are on one credit card statement, one bill, and then you just have them all right there, and that way they don't get mixed up with your personal expenses. So I recommend that. I use a mileage reward credit card with an airline that I fly frequently, but there are different things out there, and I know when you do look at those, look at the bank that they associate with, because a lot of times those banking apps will actually have budget limits that you can set on your credit card so that you don't go over a certain amount. So like I know off the top of my head, Bank of America, they have a budget function in their banking app that you can set a budget and then it'll send you a text message when you've hit that budget so that you don't overspend. I know another one is USAA has that. So most banking apps do have them, but just double check if you're getting a new credit card that the app has some type of budget, like we'll call it a safety lock, just so that you don't overspend, because it can be really easy to do, especially when a little kid looks at you with those big eyes and asks for extra candy every day. Be careful. Don't spend too much because you want to have income for yourself.
Okay. I think that's a wrap.
Peace out.